Pickleball Diaries presents Cling on the Court with your host, Lily Brown. Let's go!
Hi everyone, welcome to Cling on the Court. And let's cracking the code again. So today we are going to crack the code of the winning mentality, which is such a hot topic. And welcome Coach Jeff. Come back to our podcast again. And of course, let me just introduce Jeff again if you're first time come to our podcast. And he's a very famous performance coach and he's very excited. It is, don't be humble. And he has years of experience of training the young tennis talents, and now he come to the real sport, pickleball. And he will share his knowledge and experience with us today regarding this topic. Hi, Jeff. Do you want to say something about the winning mentality?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lil. You and I talked about this topic for a podcast idea, and it was after a CNPL event recently, and we were talking about having a winning mentality and what exactly that is and what it means and how you can develop it. And there's a lot to unpack, but I think it's a really worthwhile topic, and I think it's one that a lot of people will find useful and interesting. And it's obviously an ongoing challenge for a lot of us is how do we develop that winning mentality? And I think first understanding what that actually means may allow us to better develop the skills needed to have that winning mentality.
Exactly. So I was on side of the CNPL event. If listener you don't know what CNPL is, it represents Canadian National Pickleball League. So which also represents the highest level professional play in Canada. And it's interesting. So in this event, we have the pro player on two courts, and in the same time, the organizer, the host, London Smash, also hosting amateur events, a tournament, uh, at the same time. And I was there watching, and it's interesting. So both on the amateur side and the pro side, you can hear players, regardless they're pro or amateur, all have like, yeah, I can do better in the practice. So it is like I think it's for everyone. Like you feel like you're different. Like the tournament nerve is a real thing, and we're all facing it, regardless the amateur or the pros. And how do we deal with that? Like how do we um, help ourselves to be the best ourselves in tournament? So, Jeff, do you want to shed some lights on this?
Yeah, you highlighted some interesting things there. Like the CNPL is a team format very similar to MLP. So it presents different challenges for the players because it's a different environment and there's different partners that you might be playing with, different scoring. So it presents some possible distractions or challenges that we just aren't used to. So it does challenge our ability to perform at our best. And some people thrive in those environments, those different environments or team environments, and some people find it more challenging. But one thing you just said is like when we talk about having a winning mentality or a winning attitude, like it's important to note that winning is an outcome. So winning is an outcome and it's out of our control. So we can't control whether we win or lose. We can only influence it. So we can influence the outcomes, but we can't determine them. And as soon as we understand that, I think it helps free us up psychologically, first of all, to understand that we can't control it. So then it's like, okay, if winning's an outcome and it's out of our control, but we can influence it to a fairly heavy degree sometimes, it's like, okay, what are the processes or the skills needed to maximize the chance of winning or increase the likelihood of winning, but more importantly, increasing the chance of us performing at our best. So when we talk about having a winning attitude or a winning mentality, we're really talking about a mentality or developing a mentality that allows us to perform. Now, our own performance is within our control. So we can control things like technique, tactics, focus, and psychological skills, our emotions. We can influence our physical effort. Those are all things that are in our control. And those are types of things we want to focus on because those are process elements that may allow us to perform at our best. And if we perform at our best, it's maybe more likely that we'll win a match. But as you know, and as many others know, we can perform at our absolute best sometimes and still lose. And sometimes that's just because we're playing against players that are maybe at a much higher level than us, or maybe we're playing at a similar level as our opponents, but they also play really well. So we could actually play exceptionally well, perform basically to the best of our ability and still not win. And I think that's a really important distinction to make when we talk about having a winning mentality or winning attitude, because we hear a lot about that expression. And there's a lot of sort of like catchy sort of Instagram motivational type posts out there these days that I think sometimes oversimplify having a winning attitude and don't consider everything that goes into it, and also don't really define what it means to have a winning attitude. So when we think about a winning attitude, or if we think of athletes that we all know that are like in the pickleball space, like Ben Johns or Annalie Waters, any of these top players, when we think about the qualities they possess, as it relates to being a good performer or sort of having a winning mindset, they possess self-belief, they possess confidence, they possess resiliency, they possess the ability to control their emotions, they possess the ability to control their physical effort, their decision making. So they have all these skills at a very high level. And so all of those things are sort of process elements that go into hopefully achieving the outcome of performing at your optimal best as often as possible. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge we all face.
Exactly. It's easy to say like, okay, we need to have a winning attitude. It's so easy to say, but it's so hard. Like once you're on the tournament side, once you're thinking about, okay, I need to win, or I need to win for my teammates or my partner, and the stress level is up. Like even if you tell yourself, okay, I need to be calm. It's once again, it's easy to say, but how to execute? Just one simple example. I was drilling with a lady from my club. So we were heading back and forth. We are practicing some singles. Like, and then suddenly we say, okay, let's start doing points. When we just hitting back and forth, not recording points, like we are doing so well. Once we start record points and recording the result, the first two serves, both of us serve out. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, the tournament nerves start kicking. So, like, could you help us just walk through? So, just more like kind of step by step, what can we do before the tournament? How do we prep our mind? Like, is there anything we can like really checklist, say, okay, we need to do step one, two, three, four, following that to help us to prep for the tournament mentally, of course.
Yeah, I mean, having a checklist of process-oriented objectives is a great way to improve your performance. And the reason being is that if we're thinking about winning, or we're getting nervous about the fact that we have a tournament coming up, or we're getting nervous about playing particular opponents or something like that, we're nervous because we have some sort of fear of losing, perhaps, or fear of how we might be perceived by our peers or other players, or fear of losing. And it's like, those are all thoughts that are related to some sort of outcome, and they're related to things that are not within our control. We can control how we respond to certain things, but we can't control some of those external things. So having a checklist, first of all, like doing mini goal setting for a tournament or for individual matches or goal setting for practices is a really great way to improve your ability to perform. And those goals that you set should be process-oriented goals. And if we have a process focus, it gives us something to direct our energy to and to come back to in times that are challenging. So having process goals or a mini checklist for practices or for actual matches is a great way to potentially help yourself improve your performance. So like, if only it was as easy as having like an exact step-by-step framework for how to achieve like your ideal performance state or how to become a really, really strong performer on a regular basis. But it starts by in your practices. So, like what intensity do you practice at? How realistic are those practices? Do you have scoring and do you do gameplay in your practices after you've trained certain skills? Do you do some sort of modified scoring that maybe impose some psychological challenges on you? That's one thing I would start with is making sure that your practices resemble tournament play. So the intensity, the tactical situations you'll find yourself in, is there scoring, the length of your practice, things like that. So every individual should have their own checklist of things that they're focused on that they're trying to achieve. And those can be slightly different for practice versus match play. When I used to coach in the tennis world, when I used to often go to under 12 junior nationals as the Team Ontario provincial coach. And myself and the other provincial coaches, when these kids were young, we'd actually have them fill out on paper match play objectives for every match they competed at when they were younger. So they would set some performance objectives like I'm going to hit 70% of my serves to the opponent's backhand. I'm going to give my best effort on every ball. It could be, I'm going to breathe out at contact on every shot I hit. It could be tactical in nature or they could be little psychological tips. But the point being is that if you set mini objectives that are process oriented, it will likely give you something to focus on that keeps you present. And the more present we are, generally speaking, the better we're going to perform because it's external things that are in the future and the past that if we start thinking about the future or the past too much, it detracts from our ability to be present. And if we're not present, we can't perform, especially in a sport like pickleball, because the ball's coming really fast. There's a bunch of different shots that we could be receiving that have different speed, spin, height, depth, direction. So, if we're not present, we can't perform. So by having process objectives and staying in the process, that allows us to stay present. And generally speaking, if we're really present, we're going to perform better.
Wow, that's quite enlightening. So what you mean is we set up, even just focus our mind, or focus on the process in the tournament, not thinking about winning. That I think now I kind of think about it. It helps because now you're not thinking about now focus on, oh, I have to win. Then it really takes off the pressure. So yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. So winning it's the most obvious goal or outcome that we all want, and it's not a moving target. Like we know we want to try to win, but like again, winning is out of our control. So if we waste too much mental energy on the future outcome of winning, okay, it's going to detract us from being in the moment and being in the process. Okay, so the objective of winning really should be more the objective of performing is what we should be focusing on. So how can we perform at our best? Because that is highly under our control. We have opponents on the other side that are going to try and stop us from performing at our best, but we possess the ability to focus on process objectives that will allow us to perform at our best given any circumstances, different opponents, different environment, different ball, different court surface, all sorts of things. But winning, it's a very obvious outcome objective. But if we're focused on winning, it may distract us from the process and staying present. And so when we think about like trying to perform, so to perform at our best or to the best of our ability, really when it comes down to performing, we're talking about psychological and physical skills. So there's being a performer and there's being a player. So there's lots of people who are like good players. They have pretty good tactical skills and technical skills in practice. And they may practice really well, but they may not perform really well because of the pressures of winning and losing, right? Or tournament play. So when we're talking about performing, we're really talking usually about the psychological and physical skills. Yes, we do need tactical skills and technical skills, but even if we have those things in practice, if we don't have the psychological and physical skills, we won't be able to implement those things in tournament play or real competition. So when we're talking about performing, we need all those psychological and physical skills to be able to utilize our tactical and technical skills. A simple example of that is if we're really nervous, and we could be nervous for a number of reasons. It could be because our friends are watching. It could be because we're really afraid of the reaction of our partner if we lose or our team if we lose. Those things can interrupt our ability to stay present. And, and if we're nervous because we're thinking about those things, we're not going to make good decisions. Decision making that's tactical skills. So decision making skills fall under tactics, right? Or if we're really nervous and it makes us tight. So when we're nervous, we tend to get a little bit tight, generally speaking. So we may get like overly patient and cautious, or we might actually get impatient. But generally, nerves prevent us from making good decisions, or even if we make a good decision, we may physically actually be a little bit too tight or too rushed, and then it leads to poor performance or poor execution of shots. So when we're talking about being a good performer, we're really talking about psychological and physical skills. And if we're in the right psychological state, or our ideal performance state, or in the zone, or in a flow state, we're generally going to be able to utilize those great decision-making skills that we have and also the technical skills that we have.
Yeah, so that brings an interesting point. So in the tournament, uh, I usually like if we win the number, I usually will talk to my partner. I said, I like to serve, return first rather than choosing serve first. So here's my reason. I find when you start a game, especially in a tournament setting, like not in the pro side, you guys all know each other, but in the amateur side, often you don't know your opponents. So I find everybody is tight. So you let other people to your opponent to choose serve first. Usually they are not going to do aggressive serve because it's starting the point, everybody's tight. And also, even if they try a strong serve, often they go out or go into the net. And then there is another reason is in pickleball, if we choose return first, we get double chance and to win because we get two serves as a return team. So this is like my rationale behind. Like, what's your comment about that? I do find
Yeah,
that the first point, everybody is so tight.
yeah, you're right. So, and that's possible, right? So, and you run into people who have nerves at the beginning of a tournament for a variety of reasons. And again, like you said, it could lead to them being tight and under hitting. So they're really cautious and they might make mistakes because they are really tight and they don't trust themselves and they don't have a going for it mentality. So they may miss the serve or hit it really weak and short, which is not good if you're the server. Or they may be nervous and like try to overcompensate for those nerves and they're tight and they actually rush and it leads to them overhitting and the ball goes out, like you said. So yeah, and those are like, that's smart. If you sort of sense that when you go to play tournaments, maybe returning is a good strategy, but it's also possible you could be tight on the return as well, right? So, like
Yes.
personally, I like the idea of serving first sometimes because it's within my control. Like I can control what happens to that serve. Doesn't mean it's easy because if you're tight, maybe it's challenging, but at least you have control of the serve. You don't really know how the server or the serving team's going to come out. But all that to say is like, so that's a perfect example. Like people step up. It's a new match against unknown players. It's the start of a tournament and they're nervous. And it's like that's where having process objectives to focus on can help you eliminate nerves. So a process objective, for instance, on the serve could be I'm going to breathe out at contact or through contact. So generally, if we exhale during some sort of physical motion, it helps us stay relaxed and have a letting go feeling or more of a going for it mentality. Or you could focus on like, okay, I'm going to focus on speed on my serve. So if you're someone who gets tight, maybe you just say, okay, I'm going to swing fast on my serve. Or maybe you focus on height, or I'm going to serve the majority of my serves to the opposition's backhand. Those are just little process objectives that help direct your mind to something that keeps you present. And if your mind is directed to something that keeps you present, it makes it harder for these external thoughts or external distractions to enter your mind and cause you to be nervous, fearful, cautious, whatever, right? So the more we have something to focus on that's some like process oriented or present, keeps us in the present, the less likely these external distractions will be to come in and disrupt our flow or disrupt our ability to perform, right? And so, setting little objectives is really important. And then the one thing that you and I had talked about recently was like competing and learning how to perform at your best. It's a skill and it requires practice. And we can't become a good performer if we don't put ourselves in situations that challenge our ability to perform. So usually people who play a lot of tournaments will get better at performing in tournament play because they've had more opportunity to experience these external distractions or to feel the different emotions that come about when you're competing in a real tournament. And the more you compete and experience those potential disruptors or distractions, the better you're going to get at recognizing that you're distracted or feeling a certain way. And the better you'll get at refocusing on things that will help you perform even when you have these potential distractions. So performing is a skill, and we can't develop that skill unless we put ourselves in competitive settings. Like on a personal example, there's times where I don't play tournaments for a while for different reasons because life is busy or whatever. And then when you go to play a tournament, it feels very unfamiliar. And to perform at your best or perform at a high level when you haven't been competing a lot, it's really challenging. So competing regularly is a great way to become a better performer.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, so we need to basically train our brain to get used to the tournament
Mhm.
atmosphere, the nerves, and competing more tournament, of course, help more tournaments. But how do you also brought up another good point is like performing is a skill. So
Yeah.
how do we practice that in our daily drills? Oh, shouldn't say daily, our like more regular drills or um, our practice routine. Like we have a lot of drills and but more
Mhm.
focus on the techniques. But like how do we embed it all the mindset, the performing mindset into our practice and drills?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's the challenge that a lot of us face. But first, your drilling at some point needs to be very realistic. So it needs to have the same physical intensity that a match would have. Like lots of us go out and drill, but are we drilling at the intensity that we compete with? Often the answer is no. Like I see it all the time. I was watching two players at the club where I play at here in Kingston. I was watching them drill yesterday, and it resembled nothing like an actual point scenario or game-based play. They weren't recovering. So if you don't recover, you don't have to move for the next shot. They're hitting the ball right to each other, and it resembled nothing like actual gameplay. So physically, it wasn't demanding. Okay. And then tactically, it wasn't demanding because they were hitting the same shot over and over from one position. And they were receiving the same type of ball over and over. So our training has to be very realistic in terms of putting ourselves in situations that we're going to face in match play in tournaments. So tactically, it needs to resemble or feel like a real game in terms of the tactics and scenarios. You have to include some sort of scoring so that you feel a consequence of making or missing a shot, right? If there's no consequence to missing a shot, you don't experience the emotional feeling of being disappointed that you missed that shot and then having to adjust something. It could be just your concentration. It could be, the path of your swing or adjusting the height of the ball, the direction, the speed, whatever. But we have to have a score so that there's a consequence to missing shots. I see players out there like often drilling without any scoring ever being added into their drilling routine. And when they miss a shot, they look completely unbothered and they don't make adjustments to start being more consistent. And it's okay to be unbothered to a degree. Like in a match, we don't want to get too bothered by mistakes, but it should bother us enough that it leads to change and it leads to improved execution or performance. So, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but our
Oh, that's
drilling,
great.
it needs to resemble like tactical situations that commonly occur in match play. There needs to be some sort of scoring or outcome so that we feel what it feels like to miss shots or make shots and the ups and downs. And it physically, we need to drill at an intensity that resembles match play. If we're going out there and drilling at a low level of effort, so 60 to 70% of our max physical effort, or 60 to 70% of the physical effort we would be competing at, that's not good enough. If we don't train at a high enough intensity, we're not going to get tired, first of all. And when we all know when we play tournaments, our level of physical intensity is generally really high. We tend to put out more effort in tournament play. It's just how it is. It's human nature, generally speaking, and it's more tiring because of that. So you need to really push yourself in practice to feel what it feels like to get tired and have to perform when you're tired. So those would be some general tips that I would suggest that players institute in their drilling and their practices. And then the other thing is making sure you have a good balance of drilling. So like in a week, so like a 7-day period, maybe you're drilling, 2 days a week, and then you have 3 days a week of gameplay or something. But you need to balance drilling, and hopefully that drilling's realistic, as I just mentioned. But then you also need to play real games to sort of put what you've drilled into practice and make sure those skills transfer. So those are some tips I would give on like everyday practices and how those
Every
things.
day. I
Yeah,
know that's how addictive pickleball is, right?
yeah,
What amateur sport, like amateur player will say, I want to play every day. That's just the nature of pickleball.
that's right. And so I want to maybe I talked a lot in that last little segment there, but one of the things like we're talking about here is how do we reach our ideal performance state? So people call our ideal performance or IPS different things. It's getting into the zone, getting into flow state. And it's like that doesn't just happen magically, right? It happens with good practice habits. It happens by setting little miniature goals or little process objectives for yourself. And it's by having these good habits that we just talked about on a daily basis makes it more likely that those good habits will transfer over and the skills will transfer into competition. And how everyone gets into their ideal performance state is very different, right? Like for me, when I'm at a tournament, I have to do a really good physical warm up. I need to feel a really good sweat and almost feel like I've played a real game before I actually play my first match of the tournament. I need to get that intensity up and get my heart rate up and feel sweaty and feel physically very ready. And usually, if I feel that way, psychologically, I'll be ready. Some players like to relax. They just need a moderate physical warm up, and they just want to be very relaxed. And that helps them get into an ideal performance state or into the zone. It's very individualized. Like some people listen to like aggressive, high tempo music to get really revved up to play. Some people don't like that at all. They want to be alone. They want to be quiet. Some people can socialize a lot and be very social. Like I find that distracting at a tournament. But some people just helps them get in the vibe and it keeps them loose and maybe it prevents them from thinking too much about the upcoming match. And that's a good thing. It keeps them relaxed. So getting into our flow state is that's the challenge is how do we get into our ideal performance state as often as possible? And that's a very individualized thing, but there are some common things that most top athletes have that can get into the zone. And that's like good practice habits. Like generally, most top athletes have great practice habits. So the intensity, their training is very realistic. It resembles gameplay at some point. So getting into a flow state, like everyone has to identify what works for them. But it's important to realize that getting into your flow state usually is a result of having a good process focus or focusing on certain process objectives.
Yeah, you're very right. It's interesting. So I know when I play tournament, I don't want to talk.
Mhm.
I just want to be alone, kind of thinking to my own quiet world. And but I never practiced that ever because in the rec game or practice game, even practice game for the tournament, you always like chatty. It's always like you do a lot of socializing. I now when you mention it, I realize, wow, I never trained that kind of the mindset or getting to the flow state, which I like in the tournament ever in any practice. So
Mhm.
it becomes foreign to me in the tournament. I often like do need a bit time, kind of okay, get used to like getting to my zone in the tournament. But yeah, that's a great point. I should practice that in the
Yeah,
practice games.
you should. Like, I do a physical warm up before all my practices. Like, sometimes the intensity varies, and sometimes a little more social when I'm doing it. But I try to have a good physical warm up before all my drilling sessions and rec games. And then I try to carry that over to tournaments so it feels similar. My practices feel similar. And it's not like all of a sudden I go to a tournament and I've got to do this physical warm up and I don't even know what my routine is, or it just feels very different. By doing that in practice in rec games, it's sort of a good habit that I've built. Um, but yeah, it's like, you know, everyone's different. Like, and this kind of also goes to like the team element is, everyone, you can really easily disrupt another player's flow state. So as a partner, whether you're playing like in just a pair and going to a regular tournament, or you're playing in a team event that has like an MLP format where you have multiple team members and you could be playing with different team members, like, wouldn't it be nice if the team or the coach or the general manager or just as a group, you talked about how you would like to be treated or communicated with to help you get into your flow state? Or, so like, everyone's different. And as a teammate, we also have to bend and be adaptable to our teammates' needs and wants. Okay. But we should all know each other and how we want to be treated or communicated with. Do we want like a rah, like super intense sort of approach when we're communicating and cheering each other on?
Yeah.
Or would we prefer like a calm approach? And if we understand each other's wants and needs, and how us as individuals can perform at our best, that would be super helpful, right? So what works for one player doesn't work for another. And understanding that may optimize your ability to perform as a team. And again, when I say team, it could be just a partnership in a regular tournament with like a standard tournament format, or if we're playing on a team with multiple partners, in a different type of setting. Understanding how each of us likes to be treated or communicated with, or how we like to receive feedback, how we like to plan for matches. If we have a good understanding of that, there's a good chance we're going to improve our ability to get into our ideal performance state or get into the zone and perform optimally as a team.
Oh, thank you. So, oh, I cannot believe our time's up again. And I love to further explore this topic. And yeah, this is really good because when we communicate with our partners, often we will, especially the partners we're not usually play together, we'll talk about, okay, what's your game style? And how do you address this ball, your type of play, but often we left out how do you get to your flow state
Yeah.
and
And
how we can help each other. So especially for play, it's just so important.
so
And we will leave that exciting topics for the next time. Thank you. And then, yeah, so listeners there, please feel free to like us, follow us on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. You can easily find us on the Spotify. Yeah, and then love to continue the topic with you, Jeff, and see everybody again next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lily. Look forward to unpacking part two of this topic.
Oh,
Yeah,
exactly, right? Exciting. Let's hear more
yeah,
next week. Thank
sounds
you.
good. Okay, take care, Lily.
You too. Bye.